speaking. He's going to talk to us about alimentation in the Middle Byzantine Mount Athos, our time in the 11th century. So, Dr. Muresu, are you online?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Thank you. I would like to start by expressing my gratitude to Jan, Sophia, and all the organizing committee of this event for permitting my participation. I would also like to say hello to all of you and apologize for not being here in person, but I'm hoping to be there in the next edition of the Colloquia Ceranea, hopefully. So let's get started. My paper title is Alimentation and Meals in Middle Byzantine Mount Athos. So Athos and its community, let me try to, sorry, I'm seeing some problems in the presentation. Can you see the slides going on?
No, we see the first one.
All right. Let's try again another solution. Okay.
Okay, yes.
How about this? Okay,
Yes,
nice.
yes, perfect.
Apologies for that. So Athos and his community still represent the Orthodox monastic phenomenon in its highest form. The Athonite monasteries preserve some of the finest expression of Byzantine sacred art, architecture, and painting, especially from 9th to 11th centuries. In fact, this has been the time where Athos assumed its cultural characteristics, reflected in the choice of sites, settlement patterns, building techniques, and decorative repertoire. All of this is known both from the documentary and the archaeological record. The present contribution aims to concentrate the focus on dietary practices, starting from the earliest embryonic evidence of the Athonite monasticism. Indeed, the biographical and hymnological dossier about the first hermits from the 9th century mentioned fanciful and unrealistic accounts of their alimentation. Peter the Athonite used to procure his food through the gathering of forest products. Others, such as Euthymius the Younger, directly ate the raw grass. The assessment of these sources pinpoints the role of hunger in the path of extreme asceticism pursued by the early Athonites. The latter deeds are, however, functional to an hagiographic mythopoietic discourse and should therefore not be considered as reliable historical sources. Compared to such a problematic dossier, the development of the first structured, so to speak, monasteries from the foundation of Megisti-Lavra in 1963 allowed to obtain a much wider and reliable set of data. The latter also includes evidence from Vatopedi, Iviron, Xenophontos, and, currently abroad of the peninsula's borders, the site of Zigu. For time reasons, it was not possible to dwell on the totality of the examples, so, with the commitment to devote proper space in the written text, the paper will focus on the notable cases of Lavra, Iviron, and Zigu. The arrival of Athanasius at Athos in 1957 changed the rules, literally in a certain way. The former, in fact, interfaced with an already defined system of roles and calendared liturgical feasts. Nevertheless, he was able to revolutionize several aspects of Athonite monastic life, especially after he became igumenon of Megisti-Lavra. Athanasius' revolutionary action is known from his writings, as well as a series of hagiographical biographies named Bios A, B, and C. The former set of evidence is of particular interest as convey a first-person view of Athanasius' initiatives. The earliest is the Hypotyposis, written in 1963, as a list of regulation on the liturgical and daily routine of the monks of Megisti-Lavra. The text is indebted to the rule of Pachomius and to the later writings of Theodore of Studios, particularly the Descriptio Constitutionis Monasteri Studi and the Testamentum. In depth, it contains 6 precepts of dietary practices, which were fully embedded in the liturgy that marked almost every hour of the day, except for sleep. It is worthwhile to summarize the contents of the text. So number 21. When the bell tolls and the brethren go to the midday meal, they shall recite a verse of the Psalms, as well as the end of the meal when they get up from the table and go to the narthex to praise for the meal that they've eaten. They shall take their seats in the refectory in the order they have received. An attendant ensures that the tables are occupied without being overcrowded. A reader, meanwhile, takes his position. The ecclesiarch shall choose the first of the readings, starting with what was not read in the church due to lack of time. When the reader finishes the reading, the brethren shall take their seats at the table. 2 subsequent signals shall determine that the wine is poured and the food served. Number 22. Easter time to All Saints' Day, we eat 2 courses based on seasonal vegetables and pulses, along with 3 litri, which is a weight division roughly equivalent to the Roman pound, so it's like 327 grams and 45. So as I said, 3 litri of olive oil and 4 on feast days. On this occasion, we also eat fish, if available, cheese and eggs. We drink 3 measures of wine. In the evening, since no meal is prepared, the brethren shall eat the bread and food left over from the morning. They shall also drink 2 measures of wine. Number 23. On Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, during the feast of the Most Holy Apostles, we shall not use oil or drink wine. On ordinary days, the brethren shall abstain from eating fish, except on Sundays and feast days, when everyone shall abstain from work and from the recitation of the liturgy of the hours. Number 24. In those days, even without using the oil, the meals shall remain canonical in legumes and vegetables. The same rule shall also involve St. Philip's Day, while during Lent, the eating will consist of a single meal. From the Feast of the Holy Apostles to the one of St. Philip, on Wednesdays and Fridays, we shall not use wine and oil. However, if the days coincide with a feast or one of the commemoration, which for us means a holiday, we consume cheese, eggs, and fish. On other days, 3 portions of wine at noon and 2 in the evening are guaranteed. From the Nativity of Christ to the end of the 12th day, our diet is that of the Pentecostal season. The only period when the brethren shall be free to eat will be the week of Maslenitsa, the last before Lent, corresponding to the Carnival. Number 25. During Lent, the brethren shall eat a single meal per day, except on Saturdays and Sundays. In the first and 4th week, the meal shall remain uncharged and will consist of boiled beans or chickpeas, almonds without oil, chestnuts, or other boiled fruits. In the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th week, we shall eat boiled beans and a curse, which is unspecified, spiced with nutmeg, except on Wednesdays and Fridays, when the food served will be the same as in the 1st week. During the whole of Lent, we shall not drink wine except on Saturdays and Sundays. The last rule will not involve the sick and the elderly. Brethren, of course. Number 26, the last one. The first Saturday of Lent, starting on Friday evening, we shall not perform prostrations. On Saturdays and Sundays, we will use oil and wine, at least 2 portions at midday meal and a single in the evening, as on other Saturdays and Sunday. And on the Feast of the 40 Martyrs, when we sing the Akatistos and the Great Canon. On Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday of the Holy Week, the food is similar to that of the 1st week. On Holy Thursday, we may use oil and wine. On Holy Saturday, at the middle of the 12 hours, we shall begin Vespers until the end of the liturgy, but the refectory shall remain closed because of the late ending of the liturgy, as the hearty meal would weigh heavily on the stomach and mind. The brethren shall limit themselves to consume the blessed bread and 2 portions of wine in the narthex. So apologies for this exact reading, but I thought it would have been much more useful for you to follow the exact test. Also, my pronunciation is not the most effective, so it's just for you, really. So, as George Dennis has rightly observed, Athanasius seems to permit greater individual discretion on his community's eating habits. I was quoting. In fact, the Hypotyposis regulations frame a varied diet, primarily vegetarian, albeit without renouncing to dairy products, that is, meat and fish. The latter caloric intake would have been sufficient to guarantee the monk's sustenance in anticipation of a day of study, reflection, or manual labor, without damaging the individual's spiritual virtue or leading to the trap of the carnal pleasure. The range of available ingredients that include vegetable, pulses, chestnuts, olive oil, wine, cheese, eggs, and fish is a negative of seasonal availability. Products such as chestnuts or olives recall the Athanite landscape, as well as the Greek in general, as their usage implies the existence of structures and system to provide for the needs of the community. The specific mention of dairy products attests Megisti-Lavra also possessed cattle, as well as goats and sheep. Such detail is all the more intriguing when compared to the provision of the Typikon of Tsimiskis of 1972 that forbade the entry of grazing animals into Athos, with the exception of foreign incursion, which is at chapter 22, and granted only to the Igumenov of Lavra a single pair of oxen for turning the millstones. In the later Typikon of Monomachos, which dates to the year 1045, we read that the monastery continued to own livestock, which the abbot Neophytos did not want to renounce, despite imperial prescription. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to provide for the sustenance of the monastery, which counted 700 monks at the time. So, returning to the hypothesis, the provisions related to the metal workers, muleteers, shipwrights, carpenters, vintners, and bakers give an account of an intense range of craft activities, complementary to those for the production of primary resources. The existence of some of these facilities is also accounted by documentary record. In fact, the Bios A of Athanasios, prior to the year 1025, relates on how he had built 2 mills, guaranteeing their operation by hydraulic engineering works, Potimon Idaton Metosetewis, arguably, the latter probably coincided with the channeling of the spring at a place traditionally known as the Pool of St. Athanasius, which is Fiale to Agiotanasiou, along the southern path to Megisti-Lavra, which you can see in the photo. In counterpoint to the written sources, material record also contributes to provide an account of the dietary habits at the monastery, with information coming from both architectural and archaeological evidence. As concerned the former, we know that meals, except when specifically disciplined, were held in the refectory. The one of Lavra, located opposite to the Catholicon in the courtyard of the monastery, dates to the late 10th century. Its construction is safely related to Athanasius, and his Bios A reported that he had built the refectory together with all its needed, most probably the kitchens and the collateral compartments such as pantries, storerooms, etc. Extensive restoration over the centuries have altered the structure of the building. The last surviving component, related to the Middle Byzantine phase, is limited to a monumental entrance, preceded by a colonnaded portico. Nevertheless, it can be assumed that the inner longitudinal development and the arrangement of the mensae could not differ from the original, albeit no updated archaeological record is currently available. Compared to the refectory, at least as far as its use is concerned, the case of the bakery, the Mankipion, at the western end of the monastery, seems more problematic. An archaeological excavation during restoration of the exterior walls and the wooden trusses supporting the roof of the building led, in 2014, a discovery of a series of early dating walls was made, latterly incorporated into the current structure and positioned into the inner side of the Middle Byzantine fortification. Plutarchos Theocalidis and Stavros Mamaloukos have hypothesized for the architectural features identified a date of at least the 10th century, suggesting that they could belong to the age of Athanasius, and therefore to the origins of Megisti-Lavra. Even if this is a fascinating hypothesis, research is still ongoing, and the issue remains open. Intriguing evidence comes furtherly from archaeology, this time from material record. In this regard, the results of an excavation carried out during the restoration of the southeast wing of the monastery, built between the late 17th and the early 18th century, proved to be of primary interest. Although the excavation did not cover the entire building, it was still possible to reach the bedrock level, approximately 1 meter, 1.5 meters below the current soil. At least 5 rooms, which you can see in red, with paved and plastered pavements arranged in 2 parallel rows, was inherited at the center of the area. The compartments were interpreted as storerooms, and a series of masonry channels in light blue, next to an imposing wall face in green, was found in their proximity to the west. Again, Theocalidis hypothetically identified this situation as the ancient eastern boundary of the first perimeter of the monastery, subsequently destroyed by the installation of pipelines and incorporated centuries later into the southeastern wing. As even these hypotheses await further clearing, the removal of the thick layers of collapse filling the compartments and subsequently obliterated by the foundation of the monastery wing, dating back to the modern age, provide intriguing evidence for the Middle Byzantine phase of the monastery. The material record contained in the collapsed layers consisted in coursewares, with surfaces decorated with bundles of parallel lines and made of light brown plaster, along with shells of cookingwares, some of which engraved with Greek letters. Interestingly enough, a significant number of fragments of amphorae of 10th-11th century was found, and alongside the objects was a globular amphora of Gunsenin I Saracen 54 type. This very vessel dates to the 10th-12th century, and its surface, of an orange-reddish impasto, is decorated with a theory of lines. Its presence called for a suggestive connection to the wine trade routes of the Ganos monastery of Gazikoi, Turkey, which was very popular in Constantinople. In the latter, the amphora is attested at the Saracen complex, and particularly among the extensive excavation at the port of Theodosius at Yenikape in Istanbul, where a well-known archaeological excavation led to the discovery of 37 exceptionally well-preserved shipwrecks. In this site, the Gunsenin I Saracen 54 amphora turned out to be one of the most attested forms between the 10th and the 11th century. Finds of the vessel outside of Constantinople and its hinterland reach as far as Egypt, the Serbian-Danubian area, the Russia, Ukraine, and Sweden, as well as numerous Mediterranean maritime contexts from Apulia, the shipwrecks of Canale Pigonati near Brindisi, to the Turkish coast next to Rhodes, like the shipwreck of Serse Limani. Combining the findings allows recognizing the connotation of a market with an international scope, with dissemination operated by both sea and river carriers, as the chart shows. Megistilavra, which is the red dot in the map, may easily have benefited from such a network. In this regard, one of the Athanasius' most successful initiatives was undoubtedly the development of a landing, whose remains have been incorporated in the small port of Mandraki, above the northeastern cliffs of the Athanid coast, and a short distance from the Lavra. Nowadays, the complex consists of a fortified tower, now partially incorporated into a cottage that serves as hermit's residence, overlooking a small dock. Despite its appearance, which rests of a series of restorations during the centuries, the origin of the complex dates to Athanasius' initiatives, possibly predating the inauguration of his monastery. In fact, his Bios A states that when he returned to Athos after his meeting with Nicephorus Phocas on the eve of the completion of the works of Megistilavra, he undertook the construction of an artificial harbor. The reason of such decision, his biography states, was, and I'm quoting, because the coast in that place was dangerous, steep, and this was considered a serious impediment to the reception of guests, for it aroused great fear in those who landed there. End of the quotation. Finally, already the Bios A mentioned that the port provided warehouses, apotiki, to store goods, and also a shelter for sailors. Contemporaneous or slightly later to Megistilavra is the information about another monastery of Athos, Iviron, which foundation can be deduced from the bios of the first igumenos, John the Iberian, and his son Euthymius. The composer of the text was Georgios Hagiouritis, which served as abbot of Iviron during the mid-11th century, and is currently venerated as a saint by the Orthodox Church. The biography of the founders, although without no direct references to felt production activities, states the monks in the dependent kelia of the monastery received a pension of a single measure of wine, 3 litri of oil, a wheel of cheese, and a loaf of bread. If this detail is correct, it is therefore safe to assume that the monastery was equipped to produce such supplies. The winemaking activity is confirmed by the mention of vineyards, cellars, and vintners, the latter in charge of ensuring that wine was always served at the 2 daily meals, prepared by the cooks. The bios of John and Euthymius, finally, also reveals the cultivated fields, olive groves, and walnut groves developed around the monastery. The last example is the Zigu monastery, whose ruins are located in Frangocastro, a short distance from Uranoupolis, the western gate of Athos. The site was found in the 10th century, and despite being currently outside of the latter boundaries, it always had close relation with the peninsula and its monks. This feature has been extensively evidenced by the archaeological excavation conducted in the area between 1985 and 2005. A defensive wall enclosed the monastery. Its main entrance to the south gave access to the courtyard on the western side, which was the Catholicon, and about 20 meters west on the opposite side, the refectory. The latter, of which I could not find a picture, so I apologize for this, is currently the oldest on Athos. It consists in a square, wide building with around 15 meters for around 6 meters and a half on 2 levels, the last of which, corresponding to the hall, feature a wooden plank floor covered with marble tiles. The removal of the first layer of roof collapse, composed of wooden stones, brought to light parts of walls and paintings. Moreover, many remaining portions of the marble rectangular mensae were also unearthed. Behind the refectory, the excavation brought to light a series of production facilities, which position suggests they were concentrated in a common sector of the monastic complex. The vestiges of a large bakery oven, with 2 meters and a half of the diameter, were identified at the southern end, within a rectangular compartment next to the walls. The site was close to a smaller one, perhaps, as Joachim Papagelos, which was the archaeologist in charge of the excavation, hypothesized, a production site for consecrated breads. Traces of olive oil mills were recognized near the building. Of primary interest were the investigation at the northern side, actually, of the courtyard, with the discovery of a ruined wine press. The latter consisted in a quadrangular space of 5 and 3 meters, made of stone and mortar, and with a maximum height of 2 meters, featuring gutters and hydraulic engineering works. The building is connected to a smaller basin with a depth of approximately 50 centimeters. So, in conclusion, the brief account presented here traces a diachronic development of the dietary practices at Mount Athos, starting from an early phase when food served for geographic purposes and as an incentive to holiness by the first hermits, to a subsequent moment, to a later moment when its liturgical value arose with Athanasius' hypotyposis. The latter classified food and eating as canonical for the liturgical and everyday life of the monastic community of Megisti-Lavra. The importance of Athanasius, however, recurs even in his innovative and entrepreneurial mentality, itself pioneering in relation to other centers such as Iviron and Zigou. It is suggestive to imagine what thoughts would have crossed the mind of an elderly hermit walking along one of the paths around the base of the Athos Massif, while first observing the construction of Megisti-Lavra, and then, years later, the activities inside and outside the monastery. In fact, within a few years, Athanasius undertook the clearing of unproductive land, developing new agricultural techniques by introducing the use of oxen. He devised a complex irrigation system, introduced water mills, and also designed and built a bread-making machinery, all things never seen before on Athos. Therefore, it does not seem difficult to imagine the landscape around Megisti-Lavra, as it is today, so to speak, as a series of cultivated fields, orchards, vineyards, and olive groves, with oil presses, grasslands, chicken coops, and fishing facilities like net storage houses, if not directly a dock for boats, as the Arsanas still testifies. The monks of Iviron also had a varied diet, as the bios of John and Euthymius relates. The latter also documents the existence of brethren who act as shepherds, vine dressers, sellers, and sailors. Cultivated fields, olive groves, and walnut orchards developed around the monastery, so it is plausible to assume that the eating habits of its community also involved the introduction of fruits in the diet. Wine, in particular, was served at the 2 daily meals, as we said, similarly to the arrangement for the ordinary days at Megisti-Lavra, and it's plausible that also Iviron possessed kitchen facilities. It remains to be clarified if, and at which level, archaeological evidence can corroborate the framework provided by the documentary sources, as in the case of Lavra. Differently enough, a certain richness of material data comes from the excavation at the monastery of Zigou, with reference to the alleged wine press discovered by Joachim Papagelos near the north side of the courtyard, in addition to the aforementioned production traces related to olive processing and bread baking. What remains to be done As the starting point from future research is the continued integration of material and documentary record in order to provide an even more precise reconstruction of the dietary practices in use on Athos in the Middle Byzantine period and all their contextual and territorial indicators. I have concluded. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muresu. Very interesting and nice photographs. We shall move on to Dr. Alfred Galik. Eating habits mentioned in Byzantine Ephesos. The floor is yours.
The arrows should work. Yeah.
So, is this close enough? Can you hear me?
Yes.
First, I want to thank you cordially that I'm here and I just can give this talk to you. And I call the title Eating Habits in Ancient and Byzantine Ephesos. And as the next picture, I just spotted only Ephesos. As you have seen before on the maps, there is much more behind that. But with this talk, I'm just focusing on Ephesos, and I'm not going to compare it in a wider scale. So I'm like at the Mount Athos, although he just compared it to other sites. I will present some kind of intra-site comparison of several sites within Ephesus that have been excavated, which I want to introduce you. Can you see that? Yes. So up, there is the so-called Vedat Gymnasium that was excavated a long time ago. Above the large theater of Ephesus, there is a domus or a palace that has been excavated. Going down, there is a large circle about some roofed structure. That's the so-called the terrace house 2. And next to it, there is a small circle, the so-called Domitiansplatz, the Domitian Square, where newly excavated and discovered there was a kind of shopping area, business area, and also a kitchen and some kind of a tavern. And the last site there is the so-called Lucas Grab or Lucas Grave. I included for this comparison, and you will see even this is one site, Ephesus. It's possible to do some diachronic comparison, and it also will show some kind of inconsistencies and complications when you start to compare, which doubles up and becomes more complicated once you try to compare it to other sites which are excavated within this closer area and also in the wider area of Anatolia. I start with the dating of contexts and also with the excavation methods, because what you don't find, you can't see, and it's not there. So yeah, simple, but it's like that. So and many of the excavated areas are newly excavated sites, and sediment sieving was applied sometimes to a large scale to find not only the archaeobotanical remains, but also the small archaeological remains. So the Vedat Gymnasium, there was sieved material available, sediment samples were taken, and it goes from the 5th to end of the 6th century AD, and the samples and the material comes mainly from sewer channel fillings and debris fillings of tabernae, where food was prepared and probably sold. And the next, the Lucas grave, this was mainly hand collected or only hand collected, with a few late Hellenistic sites, a few remains, a few pieces of the Roman imperial period, and more findings from the late antique to the Byzantine, early Byzantine, middle Byzantine period, where I just subsumed that as Byzantine. The domus, or the palace above the theater, that's also hand collected. It was a very rich context, and it dates mainly from the 5th to the 17th century AD. And the Domitiansplatz I described before, the square, these were narrow rooms, little houses where things were sold, and there was also the kitchen and the taberna. And this is, it burned totally down, and everything that was inside was sealed. It was not recovered in a way, so it burned down, it was sealed. It's very, very well datable. And maybe this is in context with the Sassanids that came and burned things down. So this is a sealed context where all the remains were in this room that preserved. And here in the red circle, beneath the roofs, you just see the terrace house too, just to give you an impression how complex this all is, with all these accommodation units, with these dwellings, which changed over time, and the excavation that took place with applying modern, very accurate way of excavating it, taking a lot of sediment samples. And I'll show you the next slide. So that's the dwelling 4 and 6. So you just can imagine to bring all these contexts out of this terrace house together is quite complicated per se, but I just subsumed it and brought it together. And the major part comes from the Roman imperial period, and on beneath, on the basis of these dwellings, there are also late Hellenistic remains. So the dating of this context and the excavation method is the terrace house 2, a lot of sieved material, really large contexts like pit fillings, like vessel fillings that were completely sieved and also examined. I made two groups, the late Hellenistic remains and remains from the Roman imperial period. So I'm now talking about archaeological remains. That's quite a bit similar to archaeobotanical remains. So you should, instead there are bones, teeth and shells and stuff like that. And for further interpretation is one should always be aware of the taphonomy of the findings. So the preservation potential of the findings is very important. It gives you some hints, for example, for behavior of waste disposal, or how animals were slaughtered, dismembered, the disposal of the slaughtered animals, or you have kitchen contexts, or you have contexts where the food leftovers were deposited. So within the terrace houses, there are contexts which can explicitly placed on such disposals. But on the other hand, you should be also aware of a society that maybe has quite a social hierarchy. And in case of the terrace houses, these were very wealthy, if not to say rich people, which were living there. And we just started to work on the leftovers of these consumers. And last but not least, very important is the expertise on the identification of the remains. So very important, I always just say that, is the availability of a reference collection. What we fortunately have at the excavation house in Selçuk, where we just work with the material and we can compare all the findings directly to our reference collection for the identification. No reference collection means more not identifiable remains and not so safe identifications of the bones or of the archaeological remains. So unfortunately, I can't see here a time running or a clock, but I have time. Okay. So first identification, then is quantification. I decided to do the easiest way of quantification so that the count numbers compare the count numbers. And these are the proportions of pork, of pig, beef, cattle, and sheep, goat remains. And what you can see in the Hellenistic layers, mainly coming from beneath the foundations of the Roman terrace houses, there is already quite a high amount of pigs, which is in Anatolia not so common because usually you have much more, a high amount of sheep and goat in the nutrition. I will not rely on the kind of Felis and Canis remains, but they steadily appear. So you find in several contexts cat and also dog bones. Maybe they just came accidentally in that, but that's another question. So if people are eating dogs or not, so maybe not in this high wealthy society or even there, I don't know. So this is the quantification of findings of pig, beef, and sheep goat coming from the Roman imperial period. And what you can see here is there is more than 50% of pigs. And this is really a high amount that is, let's say, very typical for this kind of site at the terrace houses, where we just hypothesize that the people living there, they just wanted to be like Romans, they Romanized it like that, and this is expressed in this high amount of pig remains coming from the remains of the terrace houses. Oops. I switch now to the Lucas grave that is, let's say, Byzantine, and there is still a high amount of pigs, a higher amount of, compared to the Roman imperial period findings, a high amount of cattle remains, and a high amount of sheep goat. And what you can see here in dark green, there are also horses and donkeys. And I will just rely on that later. If we just go to the Vedius Gymnasium, a different context, different social stratification, still a lot of pigs, but now what you can see is a high amount of sheep and goat. So there is some kind of going on in a feeding habit or eating habit that's different compared, for example, to the Roman imperial period. And a similar proportion comes from the palace above the theater, with less cattle remains, what may also speak for the wealth and the important people living there in this palace. And finally, we just go to the Domitian Square, to this kitchen where all the remains were excavated, sieved, and kept. And what you can see here is a larger amount of sheep and goats, still a high amount of pigs, and a very quite small amount of cattle. So I just go to the Lucas grave. I just go back. What we found there in the Byzantine period, lots of just sawed off long bones like these metapodials. So this is not only food waste or what was left after the consumption. It's also interpreted as a macellum, so where people just went there and bought meat, maybe poorer people of less quality, and they also prepared, so that's what's called primary, secondary slaughter remains. They just sawed off the joints and used the shafts for making tools or whatever. In the other contexts, it looks very much like that the major part of the animals is slaughtered at quite young ages, what speaks very much for a kind of consumption pattern. So not so at the Domitian Square. From this kitchen where they just prepared, I found a lot of very chalky and weakly preserved sheep and goat and cattle bones. Many of them are just coming from the skull. And what you can see here is heavily abraded teeth of very old individuals. And my theory about that is that in this kitchen there was kind of a head soup cooked for the people, and what they just used was heads of old individuals because that was quite cheap. They made the soup and sold it to the people passing by. So after the domesticates, it's always very interesting to see how was the amount of hunting or hunted animals compared to the domesticates, and hunting is absolutely not important. So you find evidences here and there like red deer, fallow deer, roe deer remains, wild boar, fox, but also badger, but in very few quantities. So there was a kind of hunting and consumption of wild animals, but very, very limited, except for hare. So hare was obviously appreciated and hunted, and it was obviously available to buy. And what I also added is, because it comes also from the Roman imperial period, from the Vedius Gymnasium, it's Erinaceus hedgehog that can be eaten, but it could be also a natural intrusive. So the quantification is not so small. That was the reason why I just wanted to show it. So what I'm not relying on is all this kind of rats and mice and all this kind of stuff, because it's not related sensu stricto to the. Oh, I'm talking now 70 minutes. Oh no. Okay, I'm sorry. I tried to speed up a little bit. Fall and birds. So from the sieve sediment samples, you see there are lots of eggshells. So eggs were important. If you don't find them, you cannot discuss that. From the Roman imperial period, there are also eggs from singing birds, not only eggs that probably come from hens. Chicken was the most important, followed by goose, duck. Peacock, pheasant, pigeon mainly comes from the Roman imperial period, from these wealthy contexts. And it's a similar picture concerning wild birds. And what you can see here, the rock partridge is very important. At the Lucas Grab, you have white swan remains, which might be also due to artifact production. But what you just can see at the Roman imperial period, you have a variety of different species, and in pink and red, you just have a lot of remains of little singing birds that were obviously appreciated by the Romans and eaten. Remains you never can find without sieving. So I start with the fishes quickly. So with the sturgeons, there are lots of sturgeons from the Domitian Square, but there are also sturgeons from other sites in very few findings. This overrepresentation is due to that obviously a part of a sturgeon was in this kitchen and it was totally preserved. The next is the eel. We heard about it. So there are also eel bones and African catfish. What is quite nice to see here, there are Hellenistic proofs of this fish that was imported probably from Egypt or from Africa. Also in the Roman imperial period and also in the Byzantine times of the Lucas grave. I go to the freshwater fishes. Without sieving, you don't find a lot of them, what you can see here. What's very special for the terrace house, the Roman imperial period findings, you have a lot of freshwater fishes like carp, rat, common bream, and zander, pike perch. And due to Roman cuisine, they didn't like this kind of freshwater fishes, it's said. But there are basins within the living units and the terrace houses with flowing freshwater regimes. And that led me to the hypothesis that they just kept the freshwater fishes in these basins to offer real fresh fish to people come to visit and have a lunch or dinner. And this is real fresh and not like the marine fishes. You just can buy them dead at the market. So what you can see here is there are lots of fish remains from the Domitian Square and also from the Roman imperial period, because these are very special kind of sediments which were, this looks a bit random, which were sieved. So important are gray mullets, groupers, sparrows, lipfishes, and parrotfishes. So all what you can find and catch in the sea, mainly close to the shore. And the special thing is at the Domitian Square in the kitchen, and this was next to the kitchen in a storage room, there were two large amphorae that were filled with fish bones. And you just can see me here. That's what I'd done for a month. I just saw that first I sieved everything, then I saw that all the fish bones, and it turned out these are only two species, the mackerel and the Atlantic bonito, the sarda sarda. And some of them you just can see cut marks. They were just cut into two pieces and stored in these large vessels. And it looks like that this is an evidence for salsamentum from the 7th century. Okay, what you can see here is evidence for sea urchins, cuttlefish. Very often you find this kind of terrestrial helix. The garden snail, large garden snail. There are lots of different kind of snails collected and also consumed. One of these is the hexaplex, the purple snail. And in comparison to the Roman imperial period, you just find in the Byzantine period these really large and very heavy purple snails. They do not occur before. So this was kind of a special collection or keeping them. And also people were using this kind of caronia, the Triton's shell. Here you just can see on the inside some kind of cut marks while they try to get out the flesh. In the Byzantine contexts, they are not quite common, but there is an increase of this kind of large shells. Lastly, the bivalves, which were collected, the Cerastoderma, the edible cockles, are very common. You just can see that here in bluish. And what I did at the Domitian Square, because I sieved everything, I had all the mussels available, but the blue mussel shell is very delicate and fragile, and it disintegrates in pieces and pieces. And maybe this indicates that the blue muscle was also quite important, but due to a worse preservation potential, it's less preserved. And I stopped it here. I'm sorry that.
It's fascinating material.
Yeah, I tried to make it simple, as simple as possible.
But we have to move on.
Yeah. So I just stop it here.
Okay.
I
Thank
think.
you very much.
Only the conclusion is following, so you just get all the information.
It's fascinating in a way. So we move on to our online participant, Dr. Aleksander Chrószcz, if I'm pronouncing it right. He's going to talk about us the anatomical distribution of slaughter animal skeletal remains from Theodosius Harbour.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, so greetings from Wrocław. One more time, I want to ask you for forgiveness that I was not present personally in Lodz, but unfortunately my familiar situation is still constant, so I still have a problem with my cat. Thank you for the next invitation, and today we will try to step a little bit more forward. Just a minute, I will try to share the screen.
Yeah.
And now the presentation, I hope it's
Yes.
visible.
Fantastic.
Yeah, okay. So I'm really honored to be invited one more time to Lodz, and on behalf of my all colleagues, I will try to show you a little bit from our investigation which we carried out in Istanbul. Of course, last year we were also with you, so we present the preliminary report about the species distribution of estimated on during the archaeological analysis. And of course, the aim of our interest is this area which is located here. This is quite large because we have 58,000 quadrat meter divided in two. This is of course Yenikapi Metro and Marmara site in Istanbul, which started quite a lot of time ago because it was 2004. And of course, as people living in the majority of us, I think in large cities, we know that large cities has quite important problems with the transportation. So also the subway system, which was constructed in Istanbul, needs to link both sides of the city. And of course, it gives good opportunity to dig some areas which were not accessible for us earlier. And of course, during this metro construction, Yenikapi Metro and Marmara excavation in Istanbul became to be one of the most important archaeological sites from this part of the world. Of course, the Theodosius Harbour was discovered, which is located in natural cove of the mouth of the Lycos. And of course, this important harbour, which is visible on this scheme here down, was used quite intensively. But towards the middle of 7th century, with the end of the grand shipments from the Egyptians, of course, the port importance decreased, but still was used. Finally, in 12th century, the harbor area became the part of the land area of Byzantium. And of course, during the Yenikapi metro construction, as it was mentioned earlier, large number of antique shipwreck and animal remains were discovered. Therefore, also, according to the permission of Ministry of Culture and General Directorate of Cultural Heritage and Museums, together with archaeological museums, we were able to make our analysis. Of course, archaeological analysis was partly finished in 2010. It was Marmara area, but metro area is unfortunately still in progress. Last year, we also show you that if we are taking under consideration the domesticated animals, we can see that in all bone assemblage, the slaughter animals was circa 65 over 65,000 of the bones fragments coming from the cattle. It was circa 25%. Sheep and goat, which was dominating over 40%. Pig, it was 6.8%, and finally horse, it was circa 20%. The chronology of the sizes, of course, from early Byzantine period, so from 1st century after Christ to the late Byzantium, so to the 15th century. This picture is also known for all participants who were last year in Lodz, but we can see that the largest group of the ruminants is, of course, the small ruminants, so something what built a kind of archaeological mythic animal, which is known as sheep and goat group, because the differentiation between them is quite hard. The second was, of course, the remains of the cattle. In this year, we step a little bit forward, so we tried to tell actually which parts of the skeleton of these animals which was more or less numerous, and of course, as we know that the skeleton of an animal is a frame on which are suspended the muscles, so it can tell us a little bit about the preferences of people, which part of the carcasses were more or less popular. And of course, we can use quite old method known in the archaeology, which is based on the normal anatomical distribution. So we, as an idea, take the normal percentages of the bones belonging to various parts of an animal, which was completely inhumated. And of course, these percentages were estimated to exact body parts. So we have a head, so skeleton of capitis, a trunk, so skeleton axiale. This is, of course, the vertebral column together with ribs and sternum. Next, we have the limbs, which are usually divided in three, because the first is, of course, the more attractive part of the limb. So we are talking about the proximal skeleton, so arm, forearm, and of course, the thigh and the crus. And finally, the less attractive part. So we are talking about the skeleton of the hand and foot, except the fingers, which are separated in independent group. Of course, this shows us the percentage of the normal anatomical distribution in cattle and small ruminant, which is comparable, but we have also such estimations which were produced for the pigs and also horses, so they are also accessible. And the method actually is based on this, that we compare this, what we have from the normal anatomical distribution, with this, what we can find in the bone assemblage from exact sites. I hope that you are not shocked. For me, it's familiar because I'm a veterinarian. But of course, the main product of the slaughter is, of course, the slaughter animal carcasses. Here we can see all three, which are the most important for us. So the pigs, the cattle, and the small ruminant. Small ruminant is quite small, so usually these carcasses are not divided in parts, and usually they are transported in the one piece. In contrast to the pig, which are usually divided in two, and in cattle, usually we do 4 quarters. Starting from the beef carcasses, we can see on this picture that the assortment of the food which can be produced from the flesh of various parts of the body, it's quite miscellaneous, so we can get some more attractive for the people parts of the skeleton, which is, of course, the proximal part of the thoracic limb, proximal part of the pelvic limb, and, of course, the back region, which give us, for example, the best kind of meat from the cow. Of course, the general partition of the carcass, which is developed through the history, it's quite constant, because from the anatomical point of view, we can tell that when people found simply the easy way to separate the exact parts of the body which were useful for the cooking, they repeated this procedure. So some marks of the bones can tell us about the methods of the carcass partitions, and therefore we can tell that they are similar not only through the time, but also between the exact slaughter animal species. When we are talking about the cow, we can see that chuck and bristes would be the most important part of the thoracic limb, together with the rump and round from the pelvic limb, and of course the yons as a source of the food which can be prepared in various ways by the cooking, roasting, grilling, and so on. Actually, these proximal parts of the limbs give us actually the best quality of the food. If we compare this, what we have in a normal anatomical distribution, which is indicated here in red, with this what we found in our assemblage, we can see clearly the strong predominance of the skeleton membrorum proximale, so proximal part of the limbs, both pelvic and thoracic. A little bit also we can see the similar situation in the skeleton of the distal part of the thoracic and pelvic limb, and a little bit from the head. Of course, it comes to the conclusion that predominance of the more attractive parts of the both pelvic and thoracic limb are clearly visible, a little bit also from the head, and what can be surprising, also the less attractive part of the limbs can be found as a predominance. What can we have from it? So what for the cuisine would be important from this? So of course, chuck, which can be used during the grilling, stirring, slow cooking, braising, or for example, pot roasting, and is ideal to the one-pot cookers. Other like, so this is the proximal part of the thoracic limb. Next, a little bit lower, so we are going ventrally, briskets, heavily straw, noodle soups, barbecue sandwiches, and so on. Round, which resemble a little bit the chuck, but beef is much better from there. Can give us actually the pot roast, straws, ground beef, roast beef. It is also accessible for the air drying. Finally, we are coming to the head. So this meat is a little bit lower of quality, but can be used, for example, from the pie or more extraordinary dishes like beef cheeks and nostrils. As we know from the history, the beef nostrils were used in a kitchen as a substitute actually of the moose nostrils. So people pay attention to this part of the body as a delicious one. And finally, we are coming to the shrunk. Less attractive part of the limb, which has also quite a little bit smaller volume of the flesh, but also it is accessible for the straws, for the soaps, for the dishes like a beef bourguignon, if we are looking on it from the modern point of view. When we are looking on the cattle in the moment of the slaughter, we can see that majority of them are coming from the adult animals. They are adult, but not all. And the explanation can be, can be said that actually these animals were so large that they give with a good quality of accessible volume of the meat. Young animals were used less frequently. So what we can prepare actually from this today, of course, beef briskets, tenderloin, beef straw, roast straw. So maybe also these kinds of dishes were known in this territory. When we are coming to the next animal, of course, we are talking about sheep and goat. We have lamb carcasses, which can be divided in part, which one more time can be used in various ways in order to prepare the dishes with the meat and bone together, or only from the meat. The partition of carcasses is less complex like in cattle, but one more time we can see shoulder and breast, especially shoulder and leg, as areas where we have the most valuable part of the flesh. Of course, Leona and Syriana is also quite important, but the distal part of the limbs and the head give us lower quality meat, which is also cheaper. What we can produce, of course, we can produce the shoulder roast, we can produce the shoulder chops, cubit stacks, and so on. In pelvic limb, leg roast and leg chops also are accessible. Therefore, the main, if we're looking on actually on the anatomical distribution, we can see that this is surprising for us that less important and less valuable for people meat was predominating, because we have a head and we have the distal part of the limbs, which possess a pure quality meat. What can be surprising for us, this can be explained somehow. So why? Because probably the size of the carcass of a lamb is so small that they are simply transported to the town in one piece. Distal part of the limbs can be used, of course, as a source of a secondary product, probably, but also we can take under consideration something like a cheap food for not wealthy people, for example, roasted or grilled. And of course, the head, for us, maybe it is a little bit surprising, but it also can be the source of meat used for the soaps, or for the preparing actually the one piece cooked dishes, which are still popular in the North Africa today. Finally, we are seeing the animals in the moment of slaughter. If we compare, for example, the sheep to the goat, we can see that in the goat, the animals which were killed a little bit later. So maybe the importance of the secondary product was more important in case of a goat than in case of the sheep. And of course, maybe these carcasses, as I said earlier, were transported in one part, but also we can find that the secondary product of the slaughter, like horns and bones, can be also the explanation of the remaining head or distal part of the limbs as a source of the horn and bones and claws for further manipulations and procedures. And finally, we are coming to the pork. One more time, we have, of course, this carcass, which is divided into more valuable proximal parts of both limbs and the regions of the back. Of course, the pork is also the source of quite accessible in kitchen and frequently used fat. But when we are aiming to the meat, we can tell that the most important for us is, of course, the leon, ham, and blade together with arm. What can we prepare from it? Of course, the cheddar butts, butt steaks, and many other kind of meat which can be used in the cuisine by cooking, roasting, or grilling. But also, of course, the pig is a source of meat which can be easily preserved as a ham, which is also known till now. If we are comparing one more time the normal anatomical distribution to this, what we have in our answer blood, we can find that clearly visible is the predominance of the head and the proximal part of both thoracic and pelvic limb. Therefore, maybe the less attractive food, less attractive flesh from the head was used also for the preparing the food for the in the cheaper dishes, and of course the proximal part of the limbs as a source of the most valuable meat can be used for cooking, smoking, drying or smoking, because of course we have to remember that the ham is coming from the proximal part of the pelvic limb. So maybe something like slow cooked picked pork, pork roast, pulled pork, or simply the ham was the assortment which was accessible for the people in these times too. And finally, we are coming to the most controversial animals for us. Of course, this is the horse remains. We remember that in the Neolithic period, it was simply the hunting animal. Later, it was also eaten sometimes, but we have to remember that it built a lot of controversies. Together with the opinion that it is still today the slaughter animal, we have, of course, the carcass partitions with the quite more or less important part. So this better part, more valuable for the people, are one more time coming from the proximal part of the limb. So we have a shoulder, we have a breast, rump and round, a little bit of a neck, because a neck of a horse is quite well muscularized. And of course, sirloin also gives a quite good quality of the meat. if we look on this, what we have in our assemblage, we can say that the proximal parts of the pelvic and thoracic limb has a clear predominance. So these bones give the most valuable flesh for the people there. In contrast to this, the meat from the head or the axial skeleton was less frequently used. If we compare it, a horse together with the group of a horse, mule, donkey, because similar to the sheep and goat, the exact differentiation between horse and not horse, but other equid is really hard. We see that the situation looks similar. So in conclusion, we can tell that the predominance of the more attractive parts of the proximal part of the both thoracic and pelvic limb can give us, of course, the shoulder, which can produce the shoulder roast, used as a quite good source of meat to create the juicy and flavorful roast. Leg, which can be used for the roasting, cooking, frying, piece of meat preparation, a rump steak preparation, and beef steak. And of course, one more time, we have to take under consideration these controversies about horse flesh. We know that in year 732, Pope George Gregory III began to concentrate the effort to stop the ritual consumption of the horse, which was interpreted as a pagan practice. So therefore, the consumption of the horse in various parts of the world decreased. Butchering mass, of course, were found in majority of the assemblage, but the most frequently they were found, of course, in a small ruminants, which also can a little bit describe the importance of this source of meat. As I said earlier, usually the cattle remains belonging to the adult animals 4 to 7 years, which can be used earlier as a source of the secondary product. And of course, the young animals were killed or slaughtered less frequently. Finally, we have, of course, the pig. The pig flesh could be eaten by the grilling and roasting, so both together with cooking and other methods of preparation, they could give both a high or lower quality, so more expensive and cheaper food for exact groups of the local society. Pigs are also accessible in small places because we don't have to have quite large areas in order to catch them. So they are also popular in these times. And of course, some evidence of the skull of the pig remains together with the shekel and goat. We can find that this way we can tell that grilling and roasting was quite popular in this time. In case of the horses, also the conception proves, of course, the things which are visible, for example, in this picture, because in this way we are able to separate the pelvic limb from the trunk. Of course, we have also information that the white donkeys were raised in the imperial park and consumed sometimes in palace. So maybe higher societies were interested in this kind of food. Summarizing, finally, we can tell that the beef, as the most miscellaneous use of the meat, in our investigation, proved that more or less attractive part of the limbs and head were used for cooking, probably roasting, grilling, drying, and in straw, soaps, pipes, and many other dishes. In case of the lamb, majority of the carcasses were probably sold in one piece and transported to the head, so to the city. So head cooked in one piece, or straws and pies. There could be also something like a snacks which were prepared simply in a harbor. Finally, we are coming to the pork. So one more time, we have the head as a source of a less attractive meat, a proximal part of the limb, in contrast, very attractive for the people and valuable for cooking, roasting, drying, and smoking. Maybe the smoked and well-preserved part of the cadavers were used during the traveling with the ships. Finally, we are coming to the horses, more attractive part of the limb, so a clear predominance to the high quality of the food, which can be used as a roasted, cooked, fried, as a piece of meat, rump steak or beef steaks. Of course, this investigation are not finished, so I hope that in future we will be able to produce the more complete picture of these findings. But the question actually still remains, what from this tradition of the culinary art survived till now, and how much we can compare this what we know today from this area of the Mediterranean countries to this what was accessible for the Byzantines. Thank you very much. I hope that it was interesting for you. So I now stop the sharing of my screen. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sending us such important material for such a significant place. So we move on to questions.
So I'm here, slaughter me. Yes.
I just want to ask you something very simple. Maybe I missed it. What did RIP mean?
That doesn't mean rest in peace. It means Roman imperial period.
Thank you very much.
And what does hell mean?
What does hell mean?
Hellenistic. Oh, sorry. I thought it's logic. No. Roman imperial period and Hellenistic. Yeah.
So thank you very much, all three speakers. And I will have now a question which concerns your paper and the paper of colleague Aleksander Chrószcz, because you told us in your paper that it is very important to have a reference collection for doing these
Identifications,
yes. And how can the work of now of the excavations of the Theodosius Harbour and the anatomical distributions maybe make a contribution to such a reference collection, which will be helpful for you and for your research in the other way around? Or can you put it together anymore?
These are two different kind of collections. Okay. One is the archaeological collection that was excavated and will be kept somewhere and stored. And the other, the reference collection, is a collection of animal remains which are extant, which died, where you just get all the flesh off, and then you just keep it for comparison. So you have the archaeological finding, and you have the piece of your reference collection, and you just compare it, and then you just can say, this is the left tibia of a horse, or a lion, or whatever. So it's just for the identification, for the morphological identification. You need this reference collection. You just saw this cupboard with these whitish bones inside. These are all modern bones. This is not archaeological.
Thank you so much.
And of course, it's very important to say this is a rib of a horse, this is a rib of a cattle, and then you just can make this kind of distributions to reconstruct what was slaughtered and dismembered. So I do the same also for the Ephesian material, but I was too long, so I was too ambitious, and to bring all this information also, so then I have to present one species and not such a wide presentation about several spots of Ephesos.
Can I have a very specific question? The question for Alfred.
Yes.
Thank you for marvelous presentation. Did you find any wild animal remains in Domitian Square, in the kitchen you mentioned?
Did you? What did I find? Sorry.
Wild venison.
Wild animals.
Wild animal remains.
Very few. Very few.
But it means that you did.
I think I did. I'm not really sure,
Okay.
but I think
And you don't remember.
there's one fellow deer phalanx. There are some other like this badger. It's a maxilla of a badger,
I see.
but there amongst thousands of bones there are very few. So you just can count it on one hand.
Yeah. Okay, so but mainly these were remains of old animals which you interpreted were used in the kitchen, yeah?
Yes.
For food. Yeah, thank you. Yes, can I have
Yeah.
a question for Aleksander? No or not?
Yes.
Can I? Yes. Okay. So once again, thank you for marvelous presentation. You mentioned smoking pig. Why are you so sure that the meat was smoked?
Excuse me, but I don't hear you. Something was stopped. Could you repeat your question?
Okay. So in one of the slides that summarized your presentation, there were different ways of like preserving pork. And one, as I remember, was smoking. Why do you presume that pig's meat was smoked?
The answer for me is actually from our modern point of view, because we used to do it, and also sometimes in the bones we are able to find the remarks which show us that they has a contact more or less intense with open fire or something what could be indicating for the smoke. But actually, if these hams were smoked or not, it's only my actually a little bit of a fantasy. I don't have any strict proof for this, because usually the changes which occur in the flesh cannot give us a six in a bone tissues, because the flesh doesn't survive.
So as I presume, you are not positive that the meat was smoked?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have any evidence for cured meat, basically salted meat?
Also not, because if we are talking about the preservation and salting, it's also one more time is dealing with the soft tissue, and soft tissue don't survive in the archaeological materials. Yeah, so we can find, for example, the proofs of the marks of filleting, chopping, cutting, and so on, together with the activity of the fire during the roasting or cooking, but unfortunately not with salting.
But come on. Modern ways, like have also deboned, not boned, for instance, chunks of milk of meat, and probably you can find whether there is some salt in the bones that are remained. And once you find something like high amounts of salt in the bones, you can be quite sure that this is the remain of a chunk. Then together with the bones. Have you ever checked something like that?
No, but this is, thank you really, sir, for this idea, because maybe it would be accessible for us, and we will try to do it to see if it would be a good way to prove that, for example, something was preserved by the salting or not. So
preserved meat, for instance, in Italy or in Spain or in Poland, it's like having the whole ham with the bone inside and salted, yeah, with salt pepper, yeah, and then smoking. So I think it's worth checking. And the last question.
Yeah.
You mentioned eating horses. And once again, seem to be very sure that they were eating horses. Yeah.
Yes.
That they were bred for eating as for food, or do you mean that it was their secondary use? That, for instance, they were working animals? Yes. And once they were injured or too old or something like that, so they were slaughtered, and of course they were eaten.
I think that due to this information we get about the imperial palace, that they simply held and breeded the donkeys there for the cuisine, maybe the horses were also breeded only for food, but I think that part of them must be working animals. Unfortunately, in this assemblage, we didn't find the large number of the pathological changes which indicated for the draft animal use. So this question remains open. If we are not able to prove for sure if these animals were only breeded for food, but I think that partly it is possible. But majority of them maybe are horses which were simply used earlier as a normal animals like we do it today.
So, from what I guess, it means that you are unsure that horses were especially bred for food.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Of course, I'm not sure.
The presentation was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your opinion, sir.
So I have just an idea about this problem with the smoking and curing meat, because if you read Kukunes, this still groundbreaking scrutiny on Byzantine life, there he cites a lot of sources mentioning to cure, to smoke meat for making it durable. And also in the medical literature you find very often warnings not to use too much cured meat or cured fish, because too much salt is not very good for health. So it must have been existed, and so I think this might be a very important next step to compare these sources with the archaeological evidence, if we can do this or if we may do this. So it's just an idea.
May I just a short comment on that? So if you really want to prove it in an archaeological way, if you have cured, smoked, or salted and smoked, or dried pieces. So this is always the shoulder, and that's always the part of the pelvis, and part of the upper leg, and maybe part of the lower leg. Depends on if it's a pig or if it's a cattle. The only thing you can really prove it is if you have a predominance of these skeletal elements, and if you just try to remove the meat, so this is hard, and then you have characteristic specific cut marks on the surface of the shoulder blade, of the pelvis, or on the long bones, and that is a way how you can bring some light into this question from an archaeological point of view.
But can't you use any sort of analysis of
Yeah, the problem is that goes into the meat, the salt preserves the meat, maybe it goes also into the bone, but I don't think that it stays in the bone. So once
you don't think, but
once the bone covered with a kind of a salt crust lies in the earth for 2,000 years, because salt is highly soluble.
yes,
You know,
yes,
and the water washes away. So the sediment is not, except you're in a desert, there's always some kind of fluids going around. And I don't think that preserves.
But my experience, for instance, with the whole ham, yeah, the whole ham with the leg inside, so with the bone, is that when you cut and you leave it for some time, you will see some salt on the bone.
Yeah.
And I presume some of the salt can permeate into the bone, so into the tissue.
Yeah, but maybe it goes into it, but I don't think it stays, because you have to have a chemical reaction. It must be connected to the tissue. Once you have only the salt crystals in the porosity of the bone,
Yeah.
it will be washed out.
Okay. Yes, I do understand. So it is impossible just.
Maybe it's not impossible, but
Okay, for the time being, it is. Thank you. Thank you for that.
We can try to make an experiment.
So, thank you for your presentation. The three speakers, of course, but Alfred and Aleksander. And so my question, I return for just one moment to the question of the reference collection. We live in a time in which we believe that there is an acceleration of evolution, and the virus of COVID has reinforced this belief because it has muted several times. And so my question here is, can you see possible traces of evolution between your archaeological remains and your reference collection? And in that case, doesn't that constitute an interference in the use of the reference collection? And I am asking that because when working on the plants, that's always the first question that we have. You cannot identify any plants because of evolution. Unfortunately, for the people who are raising this objection, there is DNA. And if we can identify DNA, that there is not so much evolution. And so my question is really that one. Can you trace possible evolution? In that case, does that have an impact on your capability to identify correctly up to the very last detail?
yeah. So in archaeology or in biology and zoology, it's the other way around. The bones look the same, but the genetics, they say these are all different species. So, but what you were asking for is, so usually there are not evolutionary changes that are really visible. What you can see is sometimes you have large animals, sometimes you have small animals, but the morphology of the skeletal remains the same since the Neolithic. So maybe you just can find differences in shapes and forms of bones if it's wild or domesticated. But the difference are not so changing over the thousands of years that the cattle from the pre-pottery Neolithic looks completely different to a cattle bone in the Middle Ages. So the morphology is the same.
I just want to add a little thing to this. I mean, in archaeobotany, it's exactly the same. We use the modern seeds to identify the old seed, and we don't have any problems, although there might be changes. And concerning the archaeology, that's exactly the same. And in, for example, in maybe in other areas also, but the area of the Germania provinces, you have in the Roman period, the early Roman period, the cattle is smaller, and then they become larger again.
For example,
but it's all identified on the same reference collection. I mean, there's no, the morphology will stay the same.
I agree. Let's say my point is that we received this objection, and I don't think that the objection is justified. So I agree with.
Okay, I understood it differently. So okay.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Let's say, and I am glad that the morphology is stable. Let's say. My point is really that we constantly have this objection, the possible evolution and, by consequence, the impossibility to identify plants. And I don't agree with that objection.
I have a little question for Marco. Are you still there, Marco? Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. I'm here. I'm listening to this very interesting conversation, and please let me express my gratitude just to listen to. I mean, this is a very good occasion for me. So thank you.
Marco, answer me a question if you can. You showed a plan of the Great Lavra with the refectory. Am I right in thinking that those are the 19 couches that used to be in the Great Palace in Constantinople, or am I wrong?
Excuse me, could you repeat the central part of the question? So you asked me about the Great Lavra, the planimetry, and then you said about?
The refectory, yes. Are those the 19 couches that were once in the Great Palace in Constantinople?
Okay, then 19 capitals.
19 couches. You showed.
Oh, sorry. Well, I actually don't have a specific information about it, but I don't think they. I mean, it's a sort of tradition that we have, but there is no proper archaeological information about all the provenance of these materials. So I'm actually unable to give a proper answer to this question at this very moment.
Okay, thank you very much anyway.
You're welcome. I'm sorry about.
Thank you, Marco. And I did just want to thank Alexander as well, if I may, for the information about the butcher's diagram of the horse. I've never seen that information before, and now next time my wife goes away to England, I know what to ask for from the horse butcher who comes to market once a week. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you have any more questions?
Online participants, maybe?
Maybe the online participants have questions?
I have no question. Thank you.
I have no question too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we can have our coffee break.
Thank you again. Thank you again. See you soon.
Thank you very much. See you soon. I hope that next year I will be participating in person.
Yeah, likewise. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And see you next year.
It was said to give strength so it wants to